So today we're going to talk about what is Trikaya Buddhism. Ultimately, there is just one Buddha Dharma. There is one pathway to truth. It's a really wide pathway. And in the very, very beginning, the early stages of our exploration, it's good to do some shopping, go sample different pathways, different explorations of what is most conducive to your personal makeup. What is going to work for you in your life? What is something that you can actually commit to? Because if you actually want to progress on the path, there has to be some commitment. The pathway is very much what you put into it is what you get out of it. So if you put in 1%, then you'll get 1% back. If you put in 100%, you get back 108%. There's some funny math that happens when we give it our entire being. The Buddha Dharma leads to awakening. So no matter which pathway you commit to and follow, you'll find yourself dissolving, and eventually there's this lineless line, for lack of a better way to describe it, where everything changes. There's awakening, and the self is gone, and there's ecstasy, there is joy and beauty and fulfillment. And then as long as you remain in the world, there's this little strand of self that allows for relational contact. But the awakening is always there. And this is true of all paths, if you follow them all the way to the end. So Tri-Kaya Buddhism is a very simple path. There's some that are very complex, that have very detailed rituals with drums and tools and lots of incense and lots of iconography and interesting languages to learn and just a lot of stuff. And they're beautiful, and if you're drawn to that, I wholeheartedly encourage you to go pursue that. But if you're like me and just want to know the essence, like, I know there's something more than this samsaric life of just waking up and going to work and eating and pooping and sleeping and waking up and doing it all over again. I know there's something more. I know I still have to do all those things, but I just know there's something more. And I just want to know what it is. So my teacher showed me a path, and he had many, many different students, thousands of students at one point, and then near the end of his life it reduced down to a few hundred. And he taught us all individually. So even within this little Rama Mandala lineage, there are different pathways, there are different options. So over the past 26 years that I've been teaching this pathway, we've started to define it and figure out what actually are we teaching. Because this is all brand new. This is a brand new lineage. This is a brand new religion, a brand new pathway. And it is designed for the West. It's designed for people that were impatient. Let's face it. We're like, we want to know, like, what's the secret? I remember in college, before I met my teacher, reading these really ancient books on Eastern religions, and they talk about, the secret method. You just need to know the secret, and then you can achieve enlightenment. You can awaken. And so I'd read these really dense, thick philosophy books that are really hard to understand, but I would just give it my full attention and be like, okay, what's the secret? What's the secret? And it would dance around the subject, and it would get really, really close, and I'd get all the way to the end, and it would say, you need a teacher. That was the secret. And I'd be like, and I'd be just about to throw it across the room, but it's this really old book, very fragile, and I'm like, oh, I love books, I can't do that. I have to return this to the library. So I would not throw it. I would restrain myself. But I would be very, very annoyed. Why are they making it so complicated? And then I met my teacher, and I understood. Like, oh, the reason you need a teacher is because there is this transmission of light that happens, this transmission of silent mind that we're all born with. We all innately know silent mind, but we are conditioned in this world to forget that we have this capacity to exist in pure silent mind. And so our mind begins to churn with thoughts. We get to start to engage with the emotions. We interact with all the different sensations and perceptions, and we build this very complex world in which we play this game where we run towards what we want and we run away from what we don't. And we just exist in this continuum of attraction and aversion. In Buddhism, we call that attachment. And it is the root of all our suffering, because we're always running here, running there, running back and forth. And when we finally get what we want, and we've gotten rid of everything we don't want, and we have this very fragile moment where we're like, oh yes, I'm so excited. And then what happens? Life changes. The sun sets. And we enjoy the sunset, but now it's dark. And oh, our flashlight doesn't work. Or we forgot the flashlight. Remember that? Nandi and I have a story about that. I'll tell you later. Great sunset, though. But everything changes, and now all of a sudden we're right back where we were in this attachment, this attraction, aversion operating system, and we're stuck. So enter the spiritual path. When we've had enough of that running back and forth. Because if we haven't suffered enough, this is a weird thing about humans. Like, if we haven't suffered enough, it's really twisted. We won't commit. We won't say, I've suffered enough. I'm done. Okay, I'm going to follow this path and just give myself to it. Instead, we'll give, that 1% or that 5%, and then we'll get that 1 or 5% back, return on our investment. We say, one of our core practices of Tri-Kaya Buddhism is meditation. So maybe we'll meditate when we don't feel so good, and then we'll feel a little better, and then we'll feel better, and we'll forget all about meditation, and then we'll go for a while, and then we won't feel good. And then so we'll meditate again, and we'll bounce up and down, up and down. And we don't really get anywhere, but we create this new attachment to meditation. So meditation alone isn't enough. There needs to be a discipline. There needs to be the decision that I'm going to meditate every day. Twice a day is better, no matter what. And I'm not going to expect anything from my meditation. That's the hard part, because we've had that taste, especially in the beginning. We meditate and we're like, oh, wow, I feel so much clearer. I have, let go of all this stress, and I just feel better and wonderful. And that happens, in the beginning for a while. And then all of a sudden we hit a plateau. And it's like, I meditated, and where's my payoff? Where's my cookie? I feel the same as I did. Wait, I feel worse. Because now I have this clarity of all these issues that I need to deal with, and I don't want to deal with them. I just want to escape. So that's important to understand, that meditation is not an escape. The core essence of Trikaya Buddhism is we pay attention. That's the practice in 2 words. Just pay attention. Very simple. All the time. Even when you're going to sleep. If you can be aware in your dreams, it can be very interesting. Whole dream yoga. But don't worry about dream yoga right now. Just worry about when you're actually in your body, awake, and pay attention to everything, the physical sensations, the emotional, all the different sensorial arisings, the thoughts. We pay attention to all of that. And it can be scary in the first few years that you do this, because all of a sudden you're seeing things that you weren't aware of before. Congratulations, the path is working. Because that's what we're doing. We're waking up. We're becoming aware. Enlightenment, awakening, is awareness without any mental modifications. It's being fully present. Fully. Not just to the stuff that you like, but to everything. And the more we do this, the more we pay attention. So we do our meditation practice, which is our discipline. We're learning to focus and hold still in the middle of the tornado that's flying around, that is our self, that is our being, that we cling to and identify with, and we say, I am this. And we hold still in the middle by putting our focus, often on a chakra, sometimes on our breath. And we have a whole variety of different techniques that we'll use at different stages in our path. Sometimes we'll do metta meditation, where we're consciously working on bringing up compassion for ourselves and others. But the essence of meditation is that sense of focus, of being still. And this is what's transmitted when you sit with a teacher who can stop their thoughts. That's why that book, all those books that I read, you get to finally the end and it says, now go sit with a teacher. And this is all just preliminary stuff that you really didn't need to know. Because it's from a teacher that transmits the silence, the spaciousness that's already within you. It's just you got so busy, you forgot, you couldn't notice what it was. So if you find a teacher that you trust who can actually stop their thought, then you'll be able to receive that transmission. but it does require some trust. So it's okay if, the first time you sit with a teacher, you don't feel it. It just means that, you've got to practice a little bit. And you've got to build some trust in the process. I had one gal that sat with me for years, and then we were finally out sitting someplace, and all of a sudden she's like, oh, I finally see that light. I know what people are talking about. But it's because she had a lot of walls. She had a lot of good reasons to not open. And that's okay. That's the beautiful thing about the spiritual path, is it takes as long as it takes. Ideally we want to do it in this lifetime, because otherwise, you have to go through the bardo, and then you have to be reborn, and you forget everything, and then you have to find your way back to a teacher again. It's a lot of work, especially the teenage stuff. I don't want to be a teenager again. So if we can do it this lifetime, it's much more efficient. So we do our meditation practice, then we practice mindfulness. And mindfulness really just means to be present. It's our moving meditation, where we're fully here as we interact with others. We watch what arises in our mind, and we don't instantly react. It's just kind of take the scientific approach of like, oh, that's interesting. And sometimes we're really surprised by the thoughts and emotions and sensations that arise. Sometimes they seem to come out of left field, and we're just like, did I really just have that thought? And as you pay attention more and more, as you practice mindfulness at deeper and deeper levels, you start to realize that, oh, that thought didn't actually originate in my programming. That thought came from that person over there, and I just picked it up. And sometimes you can actually pinpoint, somebody walks by you and boom, you get hit with this weird thought that you'd never normally think. And it's very clear that, oh, that came from that person. How interesting. But there's this part of us that likes to sit back and watch and judge and be like, oh, I can't believe that person had that thought. I would never have that thought. But guess what? You just had that thought. Because we are all capable of everything. There's no separation. We're all capable of everything. It all just depends upon the causes and conditions that give rise to this structure in which we are interacting with the relative world. So that comes to a concept of equanimity. But in the beginning, we just play with paying attention. We just be present as we can. We watch the sensations arise and fall away. We watch the emotions arise and fall away. Emotions go so fast. But we play this trick in our brain, because our mind really likes continuity. It keeps us feeling safe. So when emotions arise, we think about our emotions. And we come up with reasons why we're feeling that emotion to make sense of the emotion, instead of just feeling the rush of emotion, which I think was Jill Bolton Taylor, this interesting neuroscientist who had a stroke, and she was fully conscious as she was stroking out. And then she watched different parts of her brain shut down, and she was fully conscious. because she was a neuroscientist, so she knew, like, oh, this part of my brain is shutting down, that part of my brain is shutting down, this is shutting down. And during her recovery, she had lost all memory. So as she's interacting with her mother, she gave the example, her mother had certain patterns that would try to push her buttons to annoy her. You know, we all have those family members that, like, we want us to behave in a certain way, so they'll do certain things to bug you, to try to get you to fall in line. And so she's watching this happen, and she feels the annoyance arise, but she has no context. So it's just like, oh, how interesting. This sensation of annoyance is arising, but she had no story to explain it, so she didn't get caught up in it. And then she timed it once. She noticed, like, oh, after about 90 seconds, that feeling of annoyance is completely gone. So the biochemical reaction that is creating the sensation of annoyance, or any emotion, only lasts for 90 seconds. So that's very useful information as we're practicing mindfulness, because if you're suddenly overwhelmed by an emotion and you can resist the temptation to build a story around it, that emotion, no matter how intense, will pass within 90 seconds. So if something doesn't go your way and you have this big flash of anger, if you can just sit with the anger without reacting to it, without feeding it, without recoiling from it, just simply being present with it, 90 seconds later it will wash through you and it'll be gone, and you'll be back to where you were. It's fascinating bodies. But that's not how most people live. You know, they have the rush of emotion, and then they build the story, and then they have to act on it, and that feeds it, creates this whole feedback loop, sometimes just within our heads. And then when we actually do interact with somebody, you know, we have So this mindfulness practice has many, many levels, you know, and then there's the whole subtle body, the energy part of us, that has its own mindfulness practice, where we become aware of the subtle parts of our being. That part of us that when we walk in a room, we automatically can feel what mood people are in, even before they turn around. You know, maybe we're in the kitchen and our partner or roommate comes in through the door, and all of a sudden we're boom, hit by their anxiety and anger and frustration. We haven't even seen them, they're in the other room. So that's a whole nother level of mindfulness, that we learn how to maintain that part of our being. So that's an important practice of Tri-Kaya Buddhism. And then the third component is contemplation, where through our mindfulness practice we see the patterns, we see the repeating places where we get stuck in suffering. And then we actually start to contemplate them. We set aside a time. So this is not meditation. We do our meditation again to focus, to still, to go into that spaciousness, to actually connect with the true nature of reality. But contemplation is about making sense of the relative. So we start to examine what is driving the patterns and how they're working, and how we're feeding into them, and how we might be able to do things differently in a more beneficial way. So we might set a timer. When we notice a pattern, we might then set a timer and say, okay, for the next 15 minutes, I'm going to contemplate just this pattern and try to really understand how it works, how it's affecting me, how it's affecting those I love. How is it holding me back? How is it propelling me forward? Basically, what is going on? And then once we have kind of worked through many of our patterns, then we can start to contemplate the higher spiritual truths. So that's why I always recommend before going to bed reading a paragraph or a page of a very high spiritual book. And that way you can fall asleep contemplating a very high spiritual teaching. Like, what is this equanimity that she briefly mentioned? What does that mean? That we're all one and the same. And that can make us go into very high, bright states while we're sleeping. And then the mind always needs to be chewing on something, so we can start to feed our mind this mind candy, if you will. So we can contemplate things, give ourselves these high things to contemplate. When we get caught up, it's a way out. But again, in the beginning, we're just learning to train the mind through mindfulness. We pay attention. We point ourselves to the higher states by focusing on beauty or gratitude. And then we continually refine the practice over and over. So there, as I said at the beginning, there are many, many different approaches to the Buddha Dharma. And there are some paths that have a lot of side quests, where you can go very deep into aspects that don't really lead to enlightenment or awakening, but that are interesting and that they're valid, they're a part of existence. Like the Siddha powers, for example. Patanjali wrote about all the different powers that can develop from focusing on the chakras. But they're side quests. They don't really lead you out. You're just kind of on the path, and then it's like, oh, let me go check out the side road. And you go and check it out, and then you wind up coming back to the main path. And then there are paths that only lead to awakening. And they just shut out all the side quests. So Trikaya Buddhism kind of falls in the middle. We have these little side quests where we go into mysticism and we explore the subtle body and have fun and play in the desert sometimes. But we always return to the main path of awakening, because that's the point. And then even after awakening, there's stabilization. The stabilization process happens at many points along the path. We obtain a certain view where it's like, oh, everything's different now, because we practiced our meditation, mindfulness, and contemplation, that we're no longer doing that little bounce up and down. At the beginning, we talked about, oh, I just feel bad, so I'm going to meditate, and I'll feel better, and then I'll feel bad, and then I'll feel better, and then I'll feel bad. We actually reach a plateau where it's like, oh, you know what? Compared to when I first started the practice, my life is pretty darn good. Maybe it's not perfect. I still have episodes of suffering, but it's nice. And so we stabilize that view. And then we start going up and down again. Up and down, up and down. But this time when we fall down, we hit that plateau that we've stabilized at. Once in a while, we might go really deep because we find a hole. We're like, oh, yes, I ignored that before. I didn't want to look. I'm like, no. But even if falling into that deep, dark hole, because we've stabilized way up here, we're able to pull our attention back up fairly easily. So it's this beautiful path that takes us in this spiral where we go around and we revisit things that we thought we knew. But then as we come and revisit it, it becomes that much clearer. There's that much deeper understanding. So it's not a path where one day we're done, where we say, okay, yes, I'm awakened, I'm finished. It's like, yes, there is that invisible line in the sand where you realize there is no sand and there is awakening, but then there's still continual refinement of that. So that's Tri-Kaya Buddhism in a nutshell. There's actually a website, trikayabuddhism.org, and there's the pith instructions that lays out the entire path that you can read. That poem, that every word was precisely chosen. So that's something to contemplate, to read through it and really say, well, what does this mean? What is that? How does that work? And explore. So I hope that helps clarify a little bit, and we'll do